Welcome to Career Tools, answering questions about travel and interviews. This cast answers these questions. How do I answer questions about travel and interviews? What do I do if they don't ask about travel? What do I do if I have a strong preference for traveling or not traveling? Well, if you want answers to these questions and more, keep listening. Here we go.
If you're a European company or have teams based there, you may want to consider leveraging the exchange rate, particularly if you're in the UK, and have Manager Tools bring our training directly to you. We invoice in US dollars, which is a benefit to you. Even better, if we can schedule the training when we're already going to be in theater, there's no travel expense either. July 29th through August 2nd, we're in the area and available to host our standard trainings, Effective Manager, Effective Communicator, or Effective Hiring Manager, for clients who have large groups where our public conference in Frankfurt may not make economical sense. We schedule our training on a first commit, first get basis. Contact Maggie at manager-tools.com or visit our website for more information.
I imagine, Wendy, in your experience you found, and it seems to resonate with me, that the amount of travel required by employees is an important consideration both for companies and for the employees.
Yeah, and getting it wrong is really bad because you end up with someone who's very unhappy and usually leaves fairly quickly. So making sure that in the interview process that you understand, as the interviewee, that you understand what the travel is and what the travel pattern is really important. And also thinking about how that will impact your work life and your work-life balance, of which there is none. But how that will impact all the other things in your life. Because if you're traveling somewhere where you've got to stay away for a night, that does impact all the rest of your life.
No, absolutely. So if you're an interviewee, right, you better be good at answering and asking questions about travel in an interview.
Right. And we're going to step people through it. So the first part is get clear on being able to travel, being willing to travel, and needing accommodation and wanting accommodation, and what all the differences between all those things are. Then say you're able or willing to travel if you are in the interview. Don't bring up travel if they don't. Get the travel details after the offer. Say that you have travel restrictions if you do after the offer, and then make a decision about taking the offer. Gosh, that's long.
Okay, that's a lot. Yeah, let's unpack all that. So the first one seems pretty clear to me. Like if you're the interviewee and you're interviewing for a job, you ought to be clear on whether you're willing to and able to or need or want, accommodations. That seems pretty clear, and I'd say almost not even worth talking about, except from experience, I know that people often don't get clear on the things they ought to prior to the interview.
Right. Needing accommodation and wanting accommodation are all very different things. So we want to go through what they are so that everybody who's listening has a framework for making decisions about the jobs that they're going for and what they do with them when they get an offer. So being able to travel means that you have the ability to, right? There isn't anybody at home who needs you to be there at night or during the day, depending on what kind of job it is, that you don't have health reasons, which mean that you can't travel. Some people love traveling, and some people just want to sleep every night in their own bed. And that's fine. There's no right answer here. It's just being honest with yourself about what the right answer is for you. For some people, I never want to travel. I never want to go away for work. I always want to be at home. And that's absolutely fine. And for other people, they're excited by the idea of being able to go to new places. So ability means you are able to. So there isn't something that keeps you at home. Willingness is about whether or not you want to do it. So whether or not you are excited by travel or you want to sleep in your own bed. And there's a reason that I'm using it back to front. So normally we say willing and able. But actually, if you're not able here, then the willingness is immaterial, right? If you have a small child and you're responsible for them as soon as they get home from school until they go to school the next day, you can't be away overnight. And so it doesn't matter how willing you are because you're not able. So you can be able and willing or able and not willing. And again, that's absolutely fine. I, in theory, could travel because I have no one to look after. But I could also say, I don't want to. So those two things are the first kind of set of consideration. And then the second bit is about accommodations. So if you're able and willing, the next thing is, do you need accommodation? So for instance, if you do have a child that you have to drop off at school, but then somebody else is responsible for picking them up, maybe you can't catch the first flight out because you have to be at school at a certain time and you can't drop children off at like 4:30 ready for the 6 a.m. flight, usually. So that's needing accommodation. There's a requirement that means that you need to do something slightly different, or you're not fully flexible around the travel.
Which is different than wanting, right?
Right. And this is kind of the fourth criteria, which is wanting accommodation. So if you're not a morning person and you still don't want to catch the first flight out, that's wanting accommodation. There's no real reason for it. You're not going to die because you had to get up early. But there's plenty of us who don't want to catch the first flight out because we like our sleep.
Yeah, if you're not a morning person. So none of those positions are wrong, right? I mean, it's okay to want some accommodation, and it's certainly okay to have preferences, right? And that's kind of the wanting thing is like, I don't need accommodations. I just want it, and that's a personal preference. It's also okay not to want to travel at all. I know lots of people who just do not want to travel. However, though, if you don't want to travel at all, you can't apply for a job that has travel knowing that you don't want to do it or you can't do it. I assume you would agree with this. If you apply and you know that the position requires travel, you're essentially saying that you're willing to tolerate some travel.
Right. You're saying, I know about this travel and I'm willing to be part of it. Yeah, I'm willing to do it. I'm willing to at least consider it as part of all of the offer. And that's the other thing about this. Once you've decided that the amount of travel that's discussed in the job description or the advert and the amount of travel that is discussed in the interviews is something that you're willing to do, you don't have to accept the job, even though you've been to the interview, right?
It's just travel's one component of a job. And when you have an offer, you're going to look at all the components and you may say, well, I don't, there's nothing preventing me from traveling other than I don't desire to do that. But if somebody, let's just take a ridiculous case, somebody is willing to pay you 3 times the going rate and you'll be a millionaire by the end of the first year and you have to travel once a month, you go like, yeah, I'll take the $1 million, travel once a month. Yeah, I can do that, right? So no, that's ridiculous. It's not going to happen. If it does happen, folks, and you're listening to this podcast and it happens after I mentioned it, I'll just take a 10% finder's fee. That's all you got to send. Just send it to Michael@manager-tools.com. And I don't take Bitcoin, so don't send me that. But seriously, obviously travel is just one of them. And then during the interview, you might find a bunch of information that suggests, I don't want to travel, but the travel's not so bad, right? I thought it might be bad, not bad. And travel is just one of many things that you would account for in your decision about whether you want to take the job or not.
Exactly. So we'll get to that at the end.
Again, folks, if you're interviewing, just we've said it before, I'm sure Wendy said it, Mark said it, is like until you have an offer, you have nothing. So don't worry about that decision until you get the offer, right? Once you get the offer, you have control and you can choose to accept it or not. But until that time, you have nothing. So stop worrying about it.
Yes. One thing at a time. And right now we're in an interview and let's not worry about the offer until we get it. So you're right. So if you are in an interview and you're willing and able to travel and they say, hey, this job has this much travel, then the simple answer to the question is, I'm sure it's a reasonable amount and I can certainly handle that.
Right. And just be clear, we're not talking really the preferences side of things. You're willing and able to travel. Not that you want to travel or that it excites you to travel a lot. If you're willing and able to travel, and you can imagine a situation where you had to do some travel and you would accept the job based on 50 other qualifications. If that's true, then say you're willing and able to travel. It's pretty clear. Don't eliminate yourself immediately if there's a possibility that you take the job.
Exactly. Yeah, don't eliminate yourself too early. That's just silly. So most times if there is a lot of travel, the company should, in inverted commas, ask you about it during the interview. They won't always, but really as part of their screening process, they should make sure that the candidate is willing to do the amount of travel or the amount of anything that is included in the job. And often it's described as a percentage. So you can see something that says 20% travel. But what that means can be very different in different companies. So 20% could be 1 day a week, it could be 1 week a month, or a whole bunch of combinations in between. And it's perfectly reasonable to apply for a job knowing you're willing to do 20% travel, but not knowing until afterwards, until you've got the offer, what the pattern is, and then finding that the pattern doesn't work for you.
Right. Now, in the interview, is it the interviewee's job to discuss the details of the job and decide whether or not you'll take it?
No, you don't have control until you get the offer. So don't bring, we're going to say it in a minute, don't bring up travel if they don't, but you have no obligation to talk about things that they don't talk about. And all you have an obligation to in the interview is to answer the questions that they ask you to the best of your ability with the best of your examples in order to get an offer. And once you get the offer, then you can start making decisions. Right.
And once you get the offer, it's not as once you get the offer, the company is going to say, okay, we're making you this offer, and you have to make your decision on everything you already know. You don't get to answer any, no more questions. Accept it or don't accept it. That's not the way it works. You get, like you said, the control passes to you, and you can ask as many questions as you want. And at this point, they made you an offer, and they are absolutely incentivized to try to get you to accept the offer. They've decided that you're the right person. You have a lot of power there. Now, one note here, though, before we go to the next point is, folks, even non-travel jobs have travel, right? 1 to 2 days a quarter for team get-togethers, or maybe they want to send you to training, and you might have to travel, right? That's reasonable for any professional role. And interviewers and job descriptions generally don't mention this level of travel. So again, one of those things probably don't need to say, but maybe we need to mention it.
We hope to have reached a happy medium with the location of our upcoming conference in the New York, New Jersey area. We'll be there July 16th and 17th with our Effective Manager and Effective Communicator conferences, and are hosting them at the Courtyard by Marriott, Jersey City, Newport. We'll be just across the river at the exit of the Holland Tunnel, which makes life easier for both those in cars and those taking public transit. Register today for a more convenient Jersey event by visiting us at manager-tools.com/training.
Okay, so your next point is don't apply if you don't want to do the travel at all, right? If the job description says, for example, 20% travel required, and you absolutely don't want to travel for whatever personal reasons you have, then clearly, don't apply for the job. It's a waste of time for you. It's a waste of time for the company. And frankly, it's unprofessional. And if you do it, you are going to burn a bridge with that hiring manager and her friends and her friends and his friends. Not a smart thing to do. That's a bad way to go. You agree with that?
Absolutely. And the world is much smaller than people think it is. They think that the hiring manager knowing that you did something unprofessional is irrelevant because they can't possibly know a whole bunch of other people that you might be applying with. And actually, they probably do. The world is very small.
Yeah, it happens all the time. There have been more than a handful of times in my career where somebody has asked me, hey, what do you know about Joe? Right? And I know somebody who had a bad experience with him in an interview is doing something similar to this, not exactly like this, but similar to this, right? And I said, everything I know about this person says, don't hire them. And it's interesting. You think they might go down a path. Well, tell me exactly what happened. Describe the details of the situation, but they don't. They say, oh, okay, dude. Well, I'm not going to interview this person. Literally, I said 5 words and they say, okay, I'll pass. Why?
Because they trust your judgment, right?
Well, they trust my judgment, and they have 100 other people to interview. So it's like we talk about in our interviewing series. Interviewers are trying to find reasons to say no. And as soon as they find one, you're done. They're trying to find reasons to say no. At least the good ones are. And this is a silly thing to do, to give anybody a reason to say no. You don't want to travel. 20% travel required. Okay, we've already said it. Don't apply for those jobs.
It's like, if you saw a job description that said 5 hours of data entry every day and you didn't want to do 5 hours of data entry, you wouldn't apply. But somehow people think that travel is different and somehow negotiable or somehow will disappear.
Exactly. If the job description said 5 hours of data entry every day, I would not apply. If it said you have to poke your eye with a pencil 2 times a day, as long as it didn't say 5 hours of data entry, I might apply. I wouldn't rule it out. It could be a pretty exciting job, but data entry, oh my God. You said it earlier, and maybe you have some more to add on. You said don't bring up travel if they don't. And I suspect some people will find that confusing, or it won't make sense to them. Well, why wouldn't I want to find out if there's travel? If they don't mention it, don't I need to find that out? Because presumably they'd say, there's some travel involved, and I'd get up and walk out of the interview. Apparently that's the way it works.
Yeah, that's never happened. Sometimes people are concerned about things that hiring managers aren't concerned about. So any company that has a significant amount of travel in a job should discuss it in the interview. They should be screening people in the interview process for the ability, the willingness to do that travel. They don't always.
But they usually do. It'd be silly of them not to.
Right, it would. But if you're not concerned about the amount of travel and they don't bring it up, then you can ignore it, at least until the offer stage, at which time you can, as you said, ask as many questions as you like about the travel and make decisions based on that. But sometimes people are worried about things that they think interviewers are worried about, and the interviewer couldn't care less or doesn't think it's a big deal. And you can twist yourself in knots trying to answer questions that aren't asked, and you can waste time in an interview talking about things that the interviewer isn't concerned about. If it's not discussed, it won't matter to you until you get the offer. And once you have the offer, you can talk about the details. But if they don't want to talk about it in an interview, don't worry about it. Just keep going and use that time to show your skills and all the things that you want to do in the interview.
Wouldn't you be a little unhappy if you found out, for example, that you asked the question, you said, is there any travel involved? And the hiring manager said, yeah, there's some travel involved. Is that a problem for you? And then you twist yourself up in knots and you answer the question in not the best way. And they conclude then, because you were, you fumbled about, like I'm doing right now, that they figured out that this must be a problem, and you don't get the offer. And then you find out later, after having not gotten the job offer, that the travel she was talking about was minimal and something completely within the realm that would make you comfortable. That'd just be silly. You'd feel like you shot yourself in the foot, which you did. So don't shoot yourself in the foot. That's one of Ozanne's rules. Mark has Horstman's laws. I have Ozanne's rules, and they are don't shoot yourself in the foot unnecessarily. That's one of my rules.
Always a good rule to live by. So we've said this several times, get the details of travel after you have the offer. So your job in the interview is to get the offer whilst being truthful. You can't lie to get the job. And then once you have the offer, you're in control. You can choose the questions that are asked and answered once you had the offer. I wouldn't use your interview questions. When you're in an interview, usually the interviewer will give you 5 minutes at the end to ask your questions. Don't use that to discuss what the details of the travel are. Use that to find out about more interesting parts of the job, but what you'll be working on, what your contribution will be, how you'll be judged, all that kind of stuff. Not how much am I get paid, when do I have to be here, what's the travel like? It's a waste of time and it doesn't show you in a good light. So once you have the offer, you can ask all the questions you want, which will give you the information that you need to make a decision. And travel is only part of that. But you can ask about what the travel is really like by saying something like, can you tell me more about the travel? where is the travel to, how often, is there a pattern? So,
Right. And notice that the question didn't have a qualifier on the beginning of the question. It was simply, can you tell me more about the travel? It didn't say, yeah, I don't really like to travel. Can you tell me more about that? Right? Just ask the question, get the data.
Yeah, I see. Get the data. And you must ask about the pattern because, as we said, travel is often described as a percentage. And if we take 25%, that could be 1 or 2 days each week. It could be a whole week out of the month. The pattern could be leave on Sunday and return on Friday, or leave on Monday and return on Friday. It could be 2 days every week or a full week every other week. And all of those can be rationally described as 25% travel, and yet they're all very different.
Very different, right? Leaving on a Sunday is very different than leaving on a Monday.
And what time you get home on Friday is a real, some people are allowed to leave at sort of on a 10 o'clock flight and they're home by 4. Other people don't leave till 5 and they don't get home till midnight. For some people, that's a big deal.
Yeah, exactly. And folks, don't ask about travel alone if you have concerns, right? Ask about other general aspects of the offer, such as, compensation, benefits, relationships, pensions, dress codes, locations, and all those other nitty-gritty details that you might be concerned with. And we suggest this because we want to guard against you sending the hiring manager an impression that you're only concerned about the travel. Again, we said before, there are many other factors. So even if you accept the role, the hiring manager may have a mental note about travel and then be focused on your adaptation rather than your success. So ask your other concerns as well. Don't just narrow it down to travel, even if it might be the most significant thing to you.
Mm-hmm. And so once you have this offer and you've asked about the travel, so you know the details, you can tell the hiring manager if you have restrictions on the amount of travel that you're able to do. And having restrictions, either needing or wanting accommodations, doesn't actually necessarily rule you out as a candidate. If the restrictions you have would make it difficult to be successful in the role, then the hiring manager has a duty to the organization to say, I don't think you're the best fit for this role.
If you have travel restrictions, so assume you do, you tell them after the offer. Just make that really clear here.
I mean, if they asked a direct question in an interview, like, can you leave every Monday on the 8 a.m. flight, and you can't, then you have to give it an honest answer. But most times they won't ask you directly like that. And there is no point in getting a job which isn't suitable for you. There's no point in saying, oh, this job's really good, except for the travel, but I'll make it work. Because within a month, you'll be miserable and wanting to leave, unless they're paying you millions, in which case it might be fine. If the travel won't work for you or any other component of the job won't work for you, it's better to cut your losses and move on to something else.
Yeah.
And it's your responsibility to say that as soon as you know that's the case, so that the hiring manager can move on to.
Yeah, it's the professional thing to do. I mean, that's the key. As a professional, if you realize the role won't work for you, it is your responsibility to say that as soon as possible. So you don't waste your time, you don't waste their time. It's just a professional thing to do. Why would you want to sit through 2 more days of interviews or cause a company to interview you for 2 more days and get 10 managers involved if, in fact, you know you are not going to take the job? Just thank them for the interview and say, this role is not suited for me.
On the other hand, don't rule yourself out too soon. One thing that candidates don't realize is that jobs can and frequently are altered for favored candidates. If you are the one they really, really want, then you can tell them what your restriction is, and often they will make an accommodation for it. And again, not during the interview, after the offer.
Exactly. For example, there may be some travel requirements, but it'd be perfectly okay if you said, hey, because I have a special needs son who has special requirements that I be home on Friday afternoons, right? They may say, okay, right? If they really want you, yeah, they can make those kind of accommodations.
Yeah. I went for a job once, and one of the duties was meeting with suppliers over lunch, which I was about 20 and freaked out at the idea of doing that. And so when they called me for a second interview, I said, no, thank you, because this part of the job really freaks me out and I don't want to do it. And they said, oh, don't worry about it. We'll just take that out of the job. Come for the second interview.
It's nice to be wanted.
I know. I was completely shocked. But then when I became a recruiter, I found out that happens all the time.
Right. Then the last point is make the decision about taking the offer.
Right. Now you have all the information. You can decide whether the job and the offer is one you want to accept. And again, getting the offer and accepting the offer are two different things. You can put 100% into getting the offer, into the interview to get the offer, and still not take the job. Even if you've closed, if you've listened to the interview series, which you should, because everybody who listens to the interview series sends us an email afterwards and says, "Oh, I got the job." It's like magic. And in the interview series, we recommend that you close, which is at the end of the interview. As the interviewer, you say, "I want an offer and here's why." And you tell them why. And the close is not, "I want the job and here's why." It's, "I want an offer because I want an offer so I can make a decision about the job." It's not, "I want the job," because then there's no decision for you. You have to take it, which would be random. So you want the offer so the control can move to you. And you can put 100% into getting that offer and still not take it.
Yeah, and during the interviewing process, if you answered by saying something like, "I'm sure it's a reasonable amount and I can certainly handle that," which we recommended, right? That does not preclude you from rejecting the job when offered it due to the travel. Even if you closed and said, "I want this offer and here's why," they had asked you during the interview about travel and you said, "I'm sure it's a reasonable amount and I can certainly handle that," does not preclude you from saying no.
Right, because an offer is a lot of different things. An offer is salary and bonus and progression and training and the interest of the work and so on. And it's all the components together that you're deciding about. If the travel was every week of the year, leaving on Monday, getting home Saturday morning, most people would not take that job because that's a lot of time away from home and it's tough on mind and body. But if I said it's for a year and the salary is $1 million and you stick it out for a year, you get an extra $1 million bonus, I might consider that job. The travel is just one part of all of the parts of the complete package, and you make the decision on the package, not on one element.
Yeah, you consider them together, right? It's unlikely that I can say, "Well, are you saying no because of the travel? You said that it'd probably be reasonable. You could do it. Are you saying no because of that?" No, it's not generally how it goes.
No. I think if you say, "I'm sorry, I'm not going to take this job," or "I don't feel it's right for me," most hiring managers don't ask for the details. They just want to move on to someone who will take the job.
Yeah. And once you get the offer, right, you're considering travel, the other components, like you said. And like you said, it's perfectly reasonable to say no, but that's not the only thing you're considering. I mean, the other thing is presumably you have other offers that you're considering. So, again, travel is one of many, many components.
Travel can be seen as a perk. Some people think, "Oh, I'd love a job where I could travel." And frequent travelers will tell you that it has its downsides too. There's, you're never home to go out to dinner with your friends, or you don't get to sleep in your own bed. And whether you love it or tolerate it, it's important to know the kind of travel that you'll be expected to do, for how much time, and the pattern, so that you and the employer can make the right decision about whether this is the right job for you.
Okay, excellent.
Thank you for coming over.
Oh, it was great to be here. I enjoyed it. All right, folks. Wendy, we'll see you next week. Possibly not me. So long, everyone.